There was not a consensus among the intelligence community, and in fact, there were dissenting opinions within the intelligence community. Neither the president nor the vice president were briefed on the alleged Russian bounty intelligence.
Now, that was White House Press Secretary trying, and I stress the word trying, to explain away the report saying the Russians pay Taliban fighters to kill American soldiers. But Kayleigh McEnany, she still wasn't done.
You say that he wasn't briefed. Does that mean it wasn't in the PDB either?
He was not personally briefed on the matter. That is all I can share with you today.
So clearly, there was not a denial that this was not information, intelligence, let's say, that was in the presidential daily briefing. Just to remind you, both the Times, CNN, Washington Post saying that information about the bounty story was in a presidential daily briefing. Now, the Times following the money, as they say, saying that American officials intercepted electronic transfers of cash from a Russian military account to the Taliban. The paper reporting it is a key piece of evidence used by the U.S. to conclude that Russia was using bounties. No comment from the Trump administration on this latest piece of damning information. I want to bring in our guest, former CIA officer Jack Rice. And Jack, I'm going to ask you some terminology to explain, but also how the process is supposed to work. First of all, this idea of intelligence and threat intelligence, as I understand it, ever since 9/11 happened, there was obviously an attempt to get rid of the stovepiping, so we shared information among the agencies in a more cohesive manner, but you always erred on the side of caution if there was threat intelligence to U.S. assets, U.S. American soldiers. It always got to the top of the list. Nobody blew it off anymore. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, the real purpose of this is to be able to prioritize. If there is something that's out there that's relevant, something that's out there that has some credibility, and something that could directly have impact upon boots on the ground, this is something that needs to get to the highest levels. And so you do make that distinction. And so you might get more information rather than less, because you don't want to leave something on the cutting room floor.
To that end, when you go through the latest reporting of timelines here, we go back to March of 2019, where this story got on the radar of intelligence agencies. Fast forward that it was in a briefing reportedly in March, and it was discussed among interagencies. So let's go through this. And I looked at some of the granular reporting the Times did on the financial transfers, and it seems to me this wasn't about some guy called Screwball. They had a bunch of financial transfers, the data in their hand. They more than a few guys were rounded up here. There was interrogations, but they found $500,000 in one guy on his body, if you will. To that end, explain to me how, when they said there was dissent among agencies, that means multiple agencies were involved in the conversation. This thing, Jack, went up the food chain.
Now, there's no question about it. Now, let's talk about intelligence and realize where it comes from. So what we may have is we may have interrogations on the ground from those who were flipped, those who were being interrogated on the ground in Afghanistan. There may be somebody else within the chain, so to speak, that we may have our hands on. We may have other assets in the region that we actually can get a hold of too. Some of those can be financial. So what's critically important here, and this is the part that's significant, is that when you get multiple sets of assets and they come at this from different angles, you're talking about somebody on the ground saying, yes, I was told to do X, Y, or Z. You also have a separate set of assets who are telling you about financial transfers, and then you get operations that actually find the money itself. What you're starting to see is something much more significant, and they actually start to support one another.
Here's something, I think it makes more sense, obviously, to somebody like you who's forgotten more about this than me or my audience, but A, you have real experience, both the CIA and also Afghanistan isn't a spot on the map. You were there, okay? The GRU is not some acronym. The GRU means they don't do anything without the blessing of the Kremlin. If the reporting is accurate here, explain why the GRU, at the same time, Putin is basically getting whatever he wants out of this administration, and we have on the table possible admissions to the G7. You have the president possibly taking us out at this time out of Syria, which is exactly what Putin wanted, the idea of prisoner releases. I mean, there were so many moving parts. Why would the GRU, or more specifically the Russians, risk any of this by trying to have some thugs, the Taliban, take out American soldiers? It just seems to me the risk reward for them was so out of whack.
Well, it makes no sense to me in the first place. The idea that the GRU was involved is exactly what the GRU would be doing. I mean, this is the intelligence piece within the Russian military that would be running ops like this in the first place. And so to simply dismiss it or say that it's nothing, especially when people below him were talking about this for a very long time. This is a critical piece of what it is that leadership is about. And it's one of the things that really, really is causing a lot of problems for people in the intelligence community. I mean, I'll leave the political piece to others, but I can tell you, for people who are operating on the ground, this is the kind of stuff that we work for. This is the stuff that we live and, dare I say it, die for. So if it's just left someplace because he doesn't have time to look at it, it's disturbing beyond words to me.
Jack, here's the other part. Let's chalk it up, and I won't even have you go there, but this president either indifferent or people within the administration feel that he's got a blind spot or worse for Russia. He can't even bring up the subject. How did somebody not escalate this to the intel communities to say our guys are being targeted by a foreign nation using a terrorist organization? How is it that, and by the way, you go through all this, this apparently was an open secret, if you will, at least among higher ranking people within the intel communities. How did this not get to other people to say, if Trump's not going to do something, somebody better, our guys, and we know of one attack that they're investigating, apparently a second attack where also potentially this is where the money ended up killing American troops. How did that not get up the food chain if the president wasn't going to do anything?
Well, see, that is the problem. And remember, this isn't hypothetical. We're talking about dead Americans here. We're talking about dead Americans. The real question is, why hasn't anything been done about it? Now, there are some operations, some things that can't be done but for the president stepping in saying, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, because there are some limitations. But if there's simply nothing being done, if your hands are shackled and you're incapable of being able to run operations either on an intelligence side or on a military side, if those are limited because of what a president chooses not to do, then what we have is something fundamentally different. And it's very difficult to end run around a president who decides to stand in the way versus one who chooses to go one direction or another.
I saw one former intelligence official saying there's no way this isn't horrific at the end of the day, that if this was presented and he ignored it, or worse, that's an indictment on an absence of a soul, let alone a dereliction of duty. Conversely, if this wasn't shared and we have an apparatus right now in an administration where something like this doesn't get in front of the president, that could almost be equally as damning. There's no way in your eyes, Jack, even if this turned out to be, some of the intel was wrong, the fact that it was never even consumed or discussed by this administration, it should scare every American. Is that right?
It absolutely should. And think about it one of two ways. You can either say that the president knew nothing about this, or the president knew about this and chose to do nothing about it. Either way, he should be jumping up and down right now by saying, if I didn't know, I should have known, and who stopped it? We're not having that conversation right now. And that's what he should be saying if that's in fact what is going on. But he's saying absolutely nothing about that issue. So I find that particularly disturbing regardless. On the other hand, if in fact he did know about this, which a lot of the evidence seems to support that he had this information a very long time ago and chose to do nothing.
I got to tell you, if I'm one of those parents and my kid never came home, or my spouse here, and I found out my husband died, and the president never bothered to read the daily briefing, take politics out of this, I would feel abandoned by my country. But anyway, Jack, I certainly appreciate the time you gave us today. I have a feeling this isn't the last time I'm going to talk on this subject. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, everyone. When we come back, we pivot to COVID. And We'll be joined by a doctor on the front lines of one of the new hotspots. I'm talking about Texas. He'll join us to discuss what he's seeing firsthand as he's being flooded with patients. We'll have more on that after this.